Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Courageous Leadership Academy Live. I am really excited for this session. I know that I say that every time, but I really do get so excited. And I'm thrilled because today I actually have the pleasure of having two guests join in conversation with us today. I have Michael Gingerich and Tom Kaden. They are co-founders of Someone to Tell It To. And we're going to be talking about the power of listening and how listening can make us better leaders and honestly, just better humans. So really just better overall. And I think we could all agree, we could probably do a little more listening these days. So interesting story about how I connected with these gentlemen. Tom and I actually connected through one of our local Chamber of Commerce events, a networking event, and realized very quickly during that event that we already had a connection that we didn't realize. We both went to the same school for our undergraduate work. So that was really fun getting to realize we had that connection. And we ended up, having coffee and connecting a bit more from there. And when I learned about the work that he and his co-founder, Michael, are doing, I thought we just need to invite them on. And so here we are. So quick reminder before I bring these guys in, if you have a question or a comment throughout the session, go ahead and enter that into the chat and we'll do our very best to try to respond in a timely manner. Okay, so without further ado, let me bring in our guests. Welcome. How are you?
Hey, everybody.
Hi. We're doing well. It's great to be here today.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. So I mentioned that you are the co-founders of Someone to Tell It To, and we'll talk a little bit more about the organization here in a minute. But why don't you take a minute and each introduce yourselves a little bit more to the audience. Michael, do you want to go first?
Sure. Michael Gingerich, and I am the first half of the co-founders. And yeah, it's just great to be here. We have been doing this for almost 9 years now, but before that we were great friends, best friends, and that has helped to fuel our willingness to work together and to go through hard things together, and really appreciate that. I live in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I am married and father of 3 sons, and I have 5 young grandchildren as well.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic.
And I'm Tom Kaden, and I'm the much younger half of someone. Always my favorite things to say. Yeah, you're not gonna
that publicly. I can't give him a hard time about it in front of other people.
I'm almost 40 now, so I can't use that too much. But yeah, I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation, and I am married to my wife Sarah, who's an RN at Harrisburg Hospital in Central Pennsylvania, and we have 4 small kids. They actually just exited the home for me to be able to do this interview. They've been doing virtual school the last couple of months, and so they gave me the space that we need here to do this conversation. So thanks for having us.
Great. Well, you'll have to tell them all thank you for for making that space. It's been an interesting several months for everyone, I think, with all the juggling around and finding a quiet space. I know I've had friends setting up shops in their closets and wherever they can find some peace and quiet. So totally understand that.
Funny story about that real quick.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Podcast, we had one woman who did the interview. Normally we do face-to-face interviews now, and we have a YouTube channel, and she didn't want it to be face-to-face because she had to do it in her bathroom. And so it was from San Francisco, and I pressed her. I was like, so where are you right now? And she said, I'm from San Francisco. And I said, no, where are you in your physical location?
She was trying to avoid that question.
Right. Oh, I think everybody can relate and understand. So bless her. I know that can be stressful. So I want to read as we get ready to hear a little bit more about your organization. I first want to read the tagline on your website because I think it's great, and I think it can help us kind of set the stage for understanding more of what you do. So the tagline on your website says, "Someone to Tell It To cultivates meaningful relationships through compassionate listening and trains others to do the same." So that is, an amazing way to capture what you do. So can you tell us all a little bit more about what that means and about the work that you do?
Yeah, well, we often say that there's really two tracks to our organization, and you hopefully can hear that in our mission statement. So our organization, we do direct service listening to individuals, groups, organizations. People just reach out from all around the world to us and our team of listeners that we've trained up. And it's been remarkable. I mean, we probably have individuals from at least well over a dozen countries, sharing about all kinds of hard things, generally hard things: grief, loneliness, despair, just lack of self-worth, lack of feeling of belovedness and valued for who they are. And then the other track of our organization is that we do training work. That we started a training program probably 2 years ago, and COVID has kind of forced our hand a little bit, and we've moved it to virtual now. But that's actually gone extremely well. We did a training for the Chamber of Commerce, Kelly, which is where we first got connected. And we've done several throughout the year. We have a team of trainers that love to train people how to listen better. And the training is kind of divided into 7 or 8 different modules that groups and organizations can go through.
And the reason we started the organization almost 9 years ago was because we recognized that there was just an epidemic of loneliness. And there are a lot of statistics, a lot of stories, and more research being done about this. There is an epidemic that around the world, not just in this country, but just about everywhere, where people are finding that and reporting that they have fewer and fewer friends, people who are close to them, fewer relationships of depth and intimacy, far more than even 30 years ago. I mean, the rates have been cut in half to the number of friends that many people feel they can confide in, or other people. And that's what's been happening. And we want to do something about that. And we think that if we could learn how to listen and not be afraid to listen to one another, that we could help to stop this epidemic. Much like a virus, it's a different kind of virus. It's an emotional virus, a spiritual virus, a mental virus that is affecting us in some very negative ways.
Wow. Yeah, it's definitely crucial and important work. And, I love that you both recognized and saw this need and decided to go ahead and do something about it, to say, okay, we're seeing that people are having these, levels of loneliness and this need to unburden themselves of feeling that, feeling the loneliness, feeling the grief, and having that option of someone to tell it to, someone to share that with. That's incredible. So, kudos for recognizing that need and then deciding to form the organization and do something about that. That's wonderful.
We can tell you where the name came from. We didn't make it up.
Yeah.
I mean, we did not make up the name. We'd love to take credit for it, but there was an Australian author. Her name was Miles Franklin.
Okay.
We thought it was a male.
Right.
But, realized that it's a woman. And she wrote that someone to tell it to is one of the fundamental needs of human beings.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is very powerful. And we believe that we all want to be known. And we all want to know that we're cared for, that we're loved, that we matter and valued. So we think that being heard goes a long way to meeting those needs that we all have.
Absolutely. So in thinking about the work that you do and your approach, can you describe your philosophy and talk a little bit about the philosophy of everyone is someone? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, for a long time, we had a hard time knowing what to call the folks that reach out to us. We don't, I was going to mention this earlier, that we're kind of outside of the traditional counseling therapy world. And we saw that there was this huge need around the world for people to be heard that wasn't being satisfied. And so we created this kind of non-traditional model, and we can talk a little bit about that in a few moments. But it was both served as a branding thing for us, that the name of our organization being someone to tell it to. But then I think we had a team member at one point, and she just she was a strong marketing mind, and she looked at our organization, and honestly, for 5 or 6 years, we just didn't know. I mean, we're fostering a lot of friendships and deep connection with people. And so we didn't like the term clients because it's too transactional, and we're not transactional. We're very relational in nature. And so she looked at our name for a long time. She's like, it's been staring at us in the face. It's someone. You're someone, Kelly. Michael's someone. I'm someone. We're all someone. And so, again, from a branding perspective, it really worked nicely for us. But then, honestly, from a value standpoint, it just aligns so beautifully with who we are as an organization that everyone has a story to tell. Everyone is someone. Everyone is someone who needs to be heard, someone who needs to be loved, someone who needs to be cared for. So we're all someone, and the someone to tell it to.
And we all want to be someone. We all want to, again, know that we're loved. We want to know that we're valued, and that's, when we can look at other people as someone's who have that value, it just makes such a difference in the way we interact with them and the way we will listen to them, because we believe they have something to say, something important to share.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting. We're talking about listening, and obviously, so people want to be heard. But I think also another way to think about that is, people want to be seen. Like you said, they want to be someone. So they want to be recognized and seen, truly seen, not just in a superficial and artificial way, but really, truly seen and heard. So that's I really like that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many different definitions about what listening is, but the definition that we tend to err on is this one that we kind of have created ourselves, that we all want to be known, and we all want to know and be known. So like,
I love that.
We want to know you, we want to know others, and we also want to be known ourselves. Like, what are some of the deeper, more intimate things about our lives that other people are not hearing about, that need to be told? And so, that was essential for us, that we kind of defined it in that way.
That's great. And so in thinking about that, and people wanting to be known and to be heard, talk to us about how that relates to compassionate listening. That's one of the things in your tagline, your mission statement. What does compassionate listening mean to you?
Well, first, the word for compassion comes from the Latin paticum, which means to suffer with. Now, it doesn't mean we suffer necessarily in our listening work, but we are willing to being compassionate means to enter into someone's pain with them. Meaning that it's not that we have to necessarily feel that pain, as much as recognize it and honor it and acknowledge that it's real, that it exists. And even if it's pain we don't understand, or pain we may never have felt, but to recognize and affirm in a person that pain is real for them. And that makes a difference. And it means also being willing to enter into things that are hard to hear sometimes, because people's pain is not comfortable. And I think we think that that's one of the reasons why many of us don't necessarily have deeper relationships, because it can be painful ourselves to hear it, even if we're not feeling that same thing. But it's hard to hear someone else's pain and grief.
Right.
And, for example, one of the things that we've learned in the work that we do from experience and from other experts is, often people will cry, because they're telling you something that's really hard. And our tendency, people's tendency, is when someone cries is to quickly hand them a tissue to hear. And what we've learned is, don't ever do that. Don't ever, unless somebody asks for one.
Right.
And they obviously want one and need one. There's a difference there. But when we just quickly offer someone a tissue, what we're actually saying to them is, wipe away those tears and stop crying. And when what they most need to do is simply cry. And compassionate means allowing people to cry and not being uncomfortable with it, not being awkward about it, not being, saying something, now, but by saying it's okay, that it's okay,
Yeah.
try as much as you need to.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think so much of what you just said really resonates too in the work that I do in trying to coach leaders and teams to have those difficult conversations. So often leaders don't give, well, they could also refrain from giving positive feedback because it makes them uncomfortable, but usually it's the critical feedback. They hesitate to give it because they're afraid of those uncomfortable emotions and how's that person going to respond. And so it is interesting to think about that overlap, that in general, we aren't quite sure what to do with those uncomfortable emotions and conversations. And so we just avoid them, whether that's in this context, unburdening ourselves from holding in emotion or being willing to listen to someone when they're doing that. It's interesting that we tend to avoid that.
Yeah, and I'll give a very helpful illustration for you and for those business leaders who are on this call that we utilize in our training. We have a caring culture training that we lead in a variety of organizations. And you probably have heard this. It's called the sandwich model. And, begin with affirmation, which is like kind of the bottom layer of the bun, of the hamburger. Then the meat is kind of some of the more challenging things to discuss together, but then always end with affirmation again. It's a lot easier to receive those criticisms, and even using that word loosely, in a healthy way. But if we do it in a context where people know they're affirmed for who they are and what they bring to the table. I know in our first book, we used this illustration that we had been to a leadership conference together, and the speaker got up and he was talking about, he's a part of the Iditarod race in Alaska.
Oh, wow.
Heard of it? And he's a professional dog sledder. Like, that's what he does. And he was just talking about each one of his dogs and how he got to this place where he started to realize as a leader, like, the first dog might be the fastest, but we need to make sure that they don't get sidetracked at times. And he talked about how, every single one of the dogs, there's a lot of pros, but there's also another side. And so, and that holds true for all of us as leaders, is that we have positive things about us, but there's also always, another maybe darker side. But it was just in his language. He didn't say, "Oh, this person's great, but they also kind of suck at this," Right. He was like, "Oh, this dog is great, and there's this other side of them as well. And we're like a package deal, and we need to kind of embrace all of who we are." But it's not always easy to do that in a working culture.
That's right. Yeah, he refrained from using the word "but." We'll say, "Oh, she's great, but." And that the but is a good thing, and it's not. And instead of saying, "Well, she's a great dog because she knows she never gets lost, and she also likes to chase after squirrels when they run in front of her." It doesn't mean that that's a bad thing necessarily, but it's it's one of the things just to be aware of, that she might be easily distracted, for example.
Right.
That doesn't. But we're all like that, and we're a package deal. And as soon as you give a compliment and then you say "but," well, you're really taking the compliment away in a lot of ways. So it's just it's a small thing, but it's significant in the way the language we use is really, and that's part of being compassionate too.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I have often actually struggled with the sandwich model for that reason, that if you lead with a positive and then say "but," so I like that approach of highlighting something positive, but then saying "but," but then saying "and," instead of, "Oh, you did this really well, but this was not so great," saying "you did this really well, and I'd like to talk about ways that we can also continue your growth in this area." Right. And then give some examples of, okay, let's talk about how we can do that. How are you feeling in this area? What do you think? I think that is a great approach. But yeah, I've not been a fan of this, but, and so that I like that a lot. That makes sense.
Yeah. There's certain words that just put us on the defensive right away.
Yeah,
but
for
is one
sure.
of them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, somebody once said that anytime you use the word but, it negates everything you just said before that.
It's so true. We have that negativity bias that you could list off 10 positive things, and as soon as you say the but, and then the one maybe critical thing, then forget it.
And then that's all we remember.
Yes,
We remember
exactly.
the but.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. What are some other suggestions that maybe you have in how leaders can apply the concepts of, being a better listener? What are some ways that leaders can do that?
Our first principle that it kind of overarches everything is back to the someone, in the sense that you have to believe if you really want to listen to somebody, you have to believe that they're worthy of being heard,
Mm,
that they are valued, that you have to respect their personhood. If we don't think that somebody's really worthy or has anything to possible good to say, we're not really going to listen.
wow.
So part of it, to begin with, it's not what you do, but it's what you believe about one another. And if you don't believe that someone, again, matters, you're really not going to hear them. And they're going to know it.
Yeah.
They're going
Wow.
to know it.
I've never thought about it that way before. That is powerful. We think about the ways people approach each other and leaders approach situations. I've never really thought it in that context before. That's really powerful. I'm gonna sit and process that one for a little while. That's gonna stick with me.
Yeah, I mean, we actually have this 10 tips for listening handout that we like to give to individuals and groups, and if anybody's interested, they can message us. But one of the tips I know that always stands out to me is acting as if every person that you meet has something important to teach you, and how much that changes the game when we're meeting with someone, whoever it might be, whether they're in the midst of poverty, or that we've met with people who are some of the richest 1% in the world. And one of the things, back to Michael's point, we found to be true, there's an awful lot that we have in common, and we need to focus on those things that we have in common. And so by focusing on what we have in common, you're leveling the playing field, so everyone has something valuable to teach you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we, to Tom's point too, and pick up on that we have a lot more in common than we have that separates us.
Yeah.
The fact is, we're all human beings.
Yep.
We all need to eat, we all need to drink. And so we do a lot of our interactions with people when we meet them face to face in coffee shops, for example, or restaurants. There's something about, obviously we can't do that right now, but we did do that for the first 8 years of what we've done. But there's something about doing something that is so common to every person's life. You need to eat and drink. Sitting down with someone over coffee or tea or a beer or a meal, people tend to open up. And there's a comfortability there. So we like to find, okay, start what we have in common as human beings. And what we also have in common, the fact is, we all get scared sometimes. We all can be insecure. We all can get tired, and we all can get frustrated, and we all experience loss. We mentioned some of these, the things that we see all the time. We all can feel lonely at times, no matter how many people we might be surrounded by. So there's also that we're all human beings who have brokenness within us and around us that we're trying to navigate. And if we can remember that, we're more patient, we're more respectful, we will listen more. And if, we realize that we just all want to be loved. Ultimately, some of us won't admit that, but that's really what it is.
Right.
And if we approach everyone like that, even when they're difficult people, often they're difficult because they're scared.
Right.
Of something.
Yeah.
And if you can break through that, then there's a real connection.
Yeah. I was just talking with someone the other day, and I said that I'm exhausted of hearing that we are a divided nation. I'm so exhausted from hearing that phrase. we have divided political views. We don't have to be a divided nation. I think exactly as you said, we are more alike than we are not. I think we all want the same things. We all want to be healthy. We want to be happy. We want to be heard and seen. We want our families to be safe and healthy. We just have different views on how to get there. But we all want the same things, and we are united in wanting those same things. And so I completely agree. And I appreciate you both saying that, because I think it's true. And the more we focus on those differences, but not in a healthy way, not we each bring a different perspective, or we bring our own culture, or we bring like those differences, yes, celebrate them. But when we think about difference as division, and the more we focus on that, the more then that just becomes true. And so I appreciate you saying that. And I really love, Tom, what you said about approaching each person that they have something to teach us, and that we can learn something from everyone. And I think that is a fantastic concept just in everyday life, outside of the workplace. But also that's a great way as leaders to remain humble and to remain connected to your team members. I think often leaders feel like, okay, I have to be in charge and I have to teach everybody everything and I have to have all the answers. But coming from that space of more, I'm the leader, I'm the shepherd, you all have something you can teach me as well. I think that makes for great leadership. So
yeah, and again, I'll talk to specifically a lot of business leaders here. I remember we listen and we quote her all the time, as you do, is Dr. Brene Brown from
yes.
Texas, and writes extensively about vulnerability. And the definition I think we probably all are in agreement on it with vulnerability is just showing up and letting ourselves be seen. And I remember one time she had, in one of her interviews, had given a talk to a bunch of Fortune 500 CEOs. And she had been approached by one of these leaders during one of the session, in between one of the sessions, and said, so you're basically saying I should go to all of my contributors here and say that we're tanking as an organization right now. And she's like, no, you don't want to do that. If you actually want to have a job, you probably don't want to do that. But I would strongly recommend that you do have a couple people with whom you can tell it to whom you can tell it to. And I think that that's the point we're trying to make here, is it is essential for all of us, especially those of us in leadership positions, to have those people within our corner who we could truly be authentic and truly be seen. And
to pick up more on that with Brene Brown, we do really love her. In fact, a couple of years ago, we went to see her speak live and in person in New York City. And it was a fantastic evening. She was just great. But there was a video that we had seen as well, where she was giving a speech she lives in Texas, and a few hours north, she had to drive in order to get there. And she opened up her talk with the fact, and she said, and I'm going to make up the number here because I'm not sure I don't remember what the number was, but whatever the interstate was, the 205, you all know what the 205 is, right? She says, well, I just want you to know, on exit 58, there's a speed trap. And the reason I know is because I got stopped and I got a ticket on my way to today.
Right.
Now, and that just warmed up the audience, and it showed everybody laughed. But she could laugh about it, even though I'm sure it was traumatic in its own way. But she shared that she's human. That here's this person, this great best-selling author, in the top 5 viewed TED Talks in the world, and it is just so popular and so wise. But she's human like everybody else. Again, making a connection with people, saying, you know what, just like probably many of you have at one point or another, I've got a ticket for speeding today. And that just creates connection, that sort of vulnerability, without giving away anything that's, really, really intimate that, that might be inappropriate or that would hurt her. But this is just saying something, I know this has happened to many of you too.
Right.
Yeah.
So, with that, thinking about that ability to show some vulnerability and connection, how does listening more, how does that help team cultures and relationships? How does that just help that whole dynamic?
First, we'd say that if people know they're heard, if they know they're valued, if they know that their voice is being considered, doesn't mean people don't have to get their own way necessarily. They just need to know that somebody's heard how they think maybe it should go. A decision that needs to be made. This is where I think it should be, or whatever. And even if it's not, just the fact that you're heard and your position is considered and respected, it makes a difference. So team culture is so much improved when people know that they're really a part of it, that their opinion, their thoughts, their experience, again, matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. That's one of the things that I've talked a good bit about in my work is that exact concept that at the end of the day, you may not ultimately go with, what that individual requested. And team members may not agree with your decision, but if they can see the thought process that went in, if they can know that they were heard and legitimately their viewpoint was considered, they'll at least respect the decision. And so that's a great point, and I completely agree. There's actually similar research in the criminal justice system where if people if defendants feel that the sentence was fairly, it was a fair process, even if they don't agree with it, they'll respect it. And so there is something about that idea of kind of fundamental fairness and being heard and how that relates. That's a great point.
Yeah. And I'll talk about the fact that, Michael and I started this organization again, almost 9 years ago, and we've had a lot of people who have shared a lot of different ideas of things we should do or directions we should head. And one of the things we've learned as leaders is, first off, you're the one who's leading, and there's a reason that you've been put in, for whatever reason, you've been the one in charge, and you've been given the keys to the car, so to speak. And Lord willing, you don't drive yourself off a cliff. But one of the ways you don't do that is you truly do listen to your team members. However, we've found that it is helpful to have kind of filters in place that, we've used this principle often when we've heard an idea and we hear it from multiple sources. Like I know at one point we had somebody who would lob an idea. Well, have you guys done much with military veterans? Have you listened to their stories a whole lot? And I think of that this week, obviously with Veterans Day. And I remember initially we responded, well, we've had scattered stories, but then over time that's become a huge niche for us. We've heard a lot of military veterans who need to process what they've experienced and gone through, and it's happened in multiple sources. And then it's like, okay, this is a real niche for us and we need to pay attention to that. The same being true with healthcare. Healthcare has just been a strong niche for us. And, when you start to hear something in 4 or 5 different places, that's probably an area of focus to focus your attention.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can see, particularly with veterans and, and first responders, that could probably it's an assumption and maybe a bit of a stereotype, but I could see that maybe that would be a little bit harder to get them to admit that they need that, that conversation, and that they, to take that step to speak to someone. So having that space and making that offer and providing that service is fantastic. Yeah, a lot of times. Go ahead.
Board member, she is one of the higher ups at Mainline Health, which is a 5-hospital system outside Philadelphia. And a couple of years ago, she realized that her team, her staff of doctors and nurses really needed more space to be able to process what they were experiencing, because there's secondary trauma and high burnout potential. And so she set up a contract with someone to tell to where our team of listeners would literally go on site and they would give us space. And we're really proud of her, because not only did she see the problem, but then she really tried hard to address it. And she gave our team members space to be able to do it. But not only that, she encouraged her staff to utilize it during their work hours. So it wasn't like an extension of their work. So like, who after a long 8-hour day wants to come and process what they've just experienced in an 8-hour day, as opposed to in the middle of your day, if there's something especially traumatic and you need the space to be able to talk it out. Well, here's a resource that we are going to provide as an organization.
That's great. Yeah, I'm hoping that more and more organizations and employers are starting to recognize the power and the benefit of providing space like that. That's great that she recognized that, and hopefully more and more will do the same thing. What has been the impact of COVID-19 on your work, both in terms of people's experiences, the way you've done the work? What has that looked like in your world?
Well, we've had to pivot to doing virtually everything virtually.
Yeah.
We've had so many Zoom interactions now, and do a lot of telephone calling, a lot more emailing and texting with people. We've seen very few people in person since COVID began. In fact, we didn't see one another for over 5 months in person.
Wow.
At the beginning, and not until I think August. From March till August, we did not see one another. We were in touch every day, literally, saw one another this way, but not in person. And we're still very, very cautious and very tentative about when we do interact personally with each other, or with anyone at this point. So there's that. But we already had been doing a lot of our work online and virtually with people, so that it wasn't all just simply in person.
Okay.
And so we didn't have to pivot too much in that regard, because we've always had people we've listened to, for example, and done trainings for people and organizations across this country and in a few other countries, and as Tom said, a dozen countries around the world. And that all had to be, for the most part, had to be virtual.
Right.
We've done some traveling. We've been flown certain places to do some work, and driven places to do some work. But for the most part, so much of it has been virtual anyway. So there's that aspect of it that hasn't changed dramatically, and it's not been difficult for us to do.
I mentioned about this contract at Mainline Health, but another contract that we had is with another organization that does mission work in 3 countries in Africa. And we had a collaboration with them, a contract with them to do very similar work, except it was all virtual. So their mission staff in those 3 countries who were experiencing high potential turnover and burnout because of the AIDS epidemic that they were addressing, they established this contract with us, and that was all done through Zoom and FaceTime and all the various social media channels that are out there.
That's great. Are you seeing any differences? I mean, it's great that you were set up to kind of do that ahead of time before all this hit. Are you seeing any changes in the discussions you're having, or themes, or is this just another facet of kind of the human experience and people needing to talk?
It's both.
Yeah.
Every conversation does move around COVID. I mean, that comes up in every conversation.
Sure.
There's virtually no conversation that is not an issue. So that, of course, is new. That was not something anyone ever talked about before.
No.
And but the problems are still there. They're the same kinds of problems of loneliness and marital discord, or relational fractures, death, dying, that have always gone on, even before a pandemic.
Right.
And just the things that human beings struggle with.
Yeah.
It's all been there, and still. And sometimes more magnified, simply because people can't step away from one another. Sometimes, as usually now, especially if it's within their own home, that there's a problem, it's a little harder to get away from that.
Right.
And, to be able to, just step aside for a little bit. But the problems are essentially still the same.
Right.
I was going to mention, Michael had just briefly touched on this earlier about some of the statistics and the research that's out there about this loneliness epidemic. But I know somebody that we've quoted often is Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was the former Surgeon General under the Obama administration and now is supposedly going to be spearheading this task force for COVID moving into next year. But he, when he first came under the Obama administration, he was expecting to focus much of his attention on a lot of these other major issues like obesity and heart disease and things like that. And he quickly realized that loneliness was the biggest potential threat to the future of humanity, along with some other things like, climate change and things like that. But, he started citing some statistics about it, like 61% of Americans in January, this is in a Wall Street Journal article that he wrote, 61% of Americans are experiencing loneliness, significant forms of loneliness. And that was prior to the pandemic. And so who knows what it's like now. And then even in work cultures, he had found that like 1/3 of people who are over the age of 45 are experiencing significant issues with loneliness in their work environments. And so, for those who are listening here today, one of the things that we just remind all of us is that we need to create space for our team members, for them to be heard. I was remembering one of our team members as an example. She had lost her brother-in-law to an overdose, and we knew it was going to be an especially challenging time for her. And so we gave her the space that she needed, the days off that she needed. But then when she came back, we didn't just dump a bunch of work that needed to be done on her. We actually spent almost an entire morning we went on a long walk with her and allowed her and gave her the space to be able to process. And therefore she was able to come back and be extra productive because she had been able to kind of purge some of the things that she was going through.
And loneliness, according to Dr. Murthy, creates a higher risk for death than when it's over, a cumulative period of time, because of what it does to our body, that it actually affects our hearts, it affects rates of cancer, it affects, our, obesity or what we eat, or, if we stress eat because we're lonely and it comforts us, that's not necessarily a good thing. And then, that creates its other problems. So, the fact that we do feel so alone so much of the time is hurting us physically, that it shows up in our bodies.
Right.
And it is a worse problem and a contributor to all these other diseases that we have. And that's never been taken seriously or never been studied.
Right.
A lot, but there was a lot more research now, and Dr. Murthy he's written a great book about that we both read, and that we think that these things are very important and they need to be recognized. Is the fact that our emotions and our mental state, what that does to us physically, and as well as professionally, and we're not as productive, we're not as engaged, we're not as creative if we're just feeling sad all the time, or depressed, or alone.
Right.
We, when it comes down to it, if you want to, put it in practical terms on a bottom line for business, loneliness hurts business.
Yep. Yeah.
And
sorry, go ahead.
And it's just so important to recognize that.
Right.
And that again, the antidote, one of the first antidote to loneliness is to be heard and to be listened to. And if only we could do that, it makes a difference. It really does.
Absolutely. One of the things that I say a lot is communication is the driver of energy placement, for good or bad. So if you have good communication within your team and in your organization, then people are, like you said, they're freed up to be creative, to problem solve, to kind of be their best selves and do their best work. But when you have toxic or ineffective communication, that's what people are going to focus on. They're going to spend their time and energy on, worrying why they're either being excluded or they're experiencing this toxic communication. They're likely going to be commiserating with their peers about, why am I being left out? Or are you experiencing this too? And that's where people spend their their time and energy, which, yes, from a bottom line perspective, is not where you want people spending their time and energy. You want them doing those positive things. But then, as you said, we also know, and there is this growing body of research that talks about how that does, in a prolonged state, really affect our physical health. We're at higher risk, like you said, for, heart disease and clinical depression. And so it's both on an emotional level, but also literally on a physical level. We're seeing these long-term effects. And it takes intentionality, and you have to put in the work. But I don't think it's as hard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I don't think it's as hard as people want to make it to be. It can be uncomfortable, and you have to put forth the effort. But I think we build it up to be something that is too difficult to tackle, and so we just don't.
Exactly.
I think that in our training about creating a caring culture, we kind of parse the word care, which actually, again, in the Latin, like Michael talked about the Latin of the word compassion. In the Latin, it's to grieve and to lament. And how many leaders are spending time grieving or lamenting with their team members, especially right now when they're grieving an awful lot? As an example, one of our team members right now is going through an especially hard time, and we've just been trying to maintain a strong connection to continue to foster and develop that relationship, to develop stronger trust with us and with her. But yeah, like you said, you have to be able to put in the time, put in the work to be able to do that. And relationships take a lot of investment. They don't just happen naturally. You really have to, it takes a lot of intentionality.
Yeah, and that's an operative word. You both use that word. We use it all the time because intentionality is that's where it starts, and that's where it continues to grow. If we are simply intentional about trying to hear, trying to listen.
Right. So I keep forgetting to acknowledge Megan's comment from earlier. She said that back when we were talking about everyone is someone. So way back in the beginning of our conversation, I've been a slacker in my moderating the comments. But she said that she loves that idea of someone. So thank you so much, Megan, for that comment, and forgive my tardiness and and sharing that with the group.
We appreciate that, Megan. We really do. You understand the importance of that word.
Yeah. So as we still have a little bit of time, but as we're approaching our 1 hour time here, I'd like to ask you each if there are kind of your main takeaways or your key things. And you can frame this as do's and don'ts or just simply do's. But what are your main takeaways when people are really starting to think about being a better listener?
Yeah, one of the things I immediately think of, and I had referenced earlier about this team member that we went on a walk. I think those of us who are in leadership roles, there's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of things that are trying to grab our attention, and there's a lot of responsibilities. It's a weighty role, especially those of you who are leading large organizations. And so the larger the organization, the larger the needs are generally. And so you have to just really be intentional about removing distractions as much as possible when you're listening. So like going on a walk with her, there was probably 1,000,001 things that we could be doing that morning. But a true hero of ours was the late Fred Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I think Kelly and I talked about this when we met. And, we love to reference one of the things that he taught us and taught the world is he would always say that whoever he was with was the most important person in his life at that moment. And so if that's true and you want that person to feel as if they're the most important person in your life, you probably don't want to be overly distracted, because how would that make you feel if somebody else was overly distracted when you were, especially when you're trying to process something heavy and filled with meaning and significance? You want to make sure that you're receiving the undivided attention that you need in that moment.
So some of those practical things are look away from your computer screen. Don't be paying attention to that or your phone screen or whatever when you are with someone. Put that stuff away, close it, turn it off, or whatever you need to do And if you get to know people, like we knew that someone liked to go for walks, well then that is a wonderful way to talk with somebody. Being outside, nature makes a difference in our attitudes and often in our demeanor. It really can help a lot. And to spend time with someone doing something like that, where there are very fewer distractions, is really important. Or if you know that somebody likes a certain coffee shop, for example, and that's where they're most comfortable, then go there with them.
Right.
We always, one of the things that we do, we give everyone we listen to the option of how they want to be heard, where they want to be heard. We can meet in person if you live nearby. We can do it, through email. There's some people who just simply write to us. That's where they're most comfortable. We can do it through Skype or FaceTime or Zoom, or we can talk over the phone. I mean, there's some people we've only ever almost texted with. That's all, but that's what works for them.
Right.
So Facebook private messaging, LinkedIn, private messaging too. So there are just a variety of ways, and we like to give people that opportunity to choose. And if we can do that, if we can meet that need, we try as much as possible to meet those kinds of needs.
That's really powerful, just right there, because they're already being heard before you've even had the conversation, just by setting it up that way. That's a great suggestion, and that's really powerful.
I don't think we've ever heard anybody put it that way, but yeah, that does make sense.
Feel free to use that. That's fine.
We'll definitely remember that, because that's really good. So thanks.
Feel free to use that.
We also know that people, particularly men, will open up more in a car.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to look at. I mean, it's easier to look straight ahead and talk and say something than it is to look somebody in the eye.
Yep.
And so a lot of guys will. There's a little stereotype there that we tend to maybe open up better that way.
Yeah.
And so we've told women who say, I just can't get my husband to talk with me, and we'll say, well, why don't you try it in the car? And we've heard from, it's like, yeah, that actually is better. That works.
Yeah.
So
yeah, one of my friends, she says the only time she can get her husband to talk is if they go for a run together. She's like, if they go for a run together, that's once, and not right away, but once they kind of start the run and settle in, then he'll open up and talk. But otherwise, forget it. So that's funny you say that, but yeah, that makes sense. Where people are most comfortable. Yeah. Anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I guess maybe two other things that I'm thinking of right now.
Yeah.
And Tom, please add if you think of more. But we don't judge. We don't ever say, "Why did you do that?"
What were you thinking?
What is wrong with you? Or why did you say that to him or her or whatever? We don't judge people and put them on the defensive, because the second we do that, the door closes. They're not gonna keep talking. They're not gonna be vulnerable. They're not gonna share openly. There's that. And secondly, we don't try to fix. We don't tell people what to do. Most people, most of the time, actually do know what to do. They need to talk it out.
Right.
And they need to it's best when they, or all of us, come to the solution on our own. Yeah. Now we can have help. We can have someone asking us the right questions, or are affirming the direction we're, affirming our search and our journey. But none of us likes to be told what to do.
Right.
We don't. And so we don't do that, but we help people find their way.
That's great.
And give them permission to do what they already know most of the time is the right thing to do.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me a lot of in motivational interviewing, where you're asking those open-ended questions to help people get there themselves, rather than just telling them what to do. Because like I said, we don't want to be told what to do, but if it's our own idea and somebody affirms that, well, that's great. Then that we like. How about you, Tom? Anything else that you'd like to add?
Not necessarily in terms of tips, and we could go on and on.
Sure. Yeah.
Day, but I would like to just talk a little bit more about our organization, some things that we would love for your listeners to maybe be supportive of. We just had our big annual virtual event. We're a nonprofit. And so we've made a commitment early on that we're never going to turn anybody away based on their inability to pay for our time. So our listeners, offer up their time and energy and investment into these folks, these someones who reach out. And so we're always looking for just more and more supporters who believe in our work and can support our mission. But then the other thing is we had this big annual gathering this weekend, and we would love for that to be shared widely. You can find it on our website. You can find it on our social media feeds. You can find us on Someone to Tell To, Twitter, Instagram, on Facebook. And, that's just one way that you can be supportive and follow our work. So we'd appreciate that very much.
You gave the excellent segue there, because that was going to be my last and kind of follow-up question there was, where can people find you? And I will, on the replay for this, this will exist on YouTube after we are done here today. In the description, I'll make sure I include the links for everything that you just mentioned. The website, those specific areas on the website, your social media. So I'll make sure people can find you and continue to follow your work and support you, because it really is phenomenal work. So thank you both so much. I really, really enjoyed it. I think we could probably sit here for another 3 or 4 hours and easily, listen to one another.
Our favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you all for watching. And take
Thanks,
care, everyone.
Happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.